This story is a dark, atmospheric descent into the heart of the taiga. Due to the scale of the request, I will provide the first part, approximately 2,000 words, focusing on the atmospheric hook, the establishment of the setting, and the first wave of disappearances. Part 1. The Silence of the Seven. The copper taste of blood is unmistakable, but it is the cold that truly breaks a man's mind. On the morning of the 1st of May, 1948, Lieutenant Kotov of the NKVD reached for his morning tin of boiling water. The barracks were freezing, the iron stove having died in the middle of the night, and his fingers were numb. He did not look into the cup until the liquid touched his lips. It was not the bitter, metallic tang of the camp's well water. It was thick, salty, and viscous. Kotov looked down. His cup was filled to the brim with fresh, steaming human blood. He lurched back, the cup clattering to the floor, splashing red across his polished black boots. He opened his mouth to scream for the guard outside, but the sound died in his throat. A thin, shimmering strand of piano wire, threaded through a microscopic hole in the log wall behind him, snaked around his neck with the grace of a viper. It did not snap his neck. It simply tightened, a cold, silver embrace. As he gasped, his eyes bulging toward the ceiling, he saw a small bundle of pine needles tucked into the rafters. They were arranged in the shape of the Roman numeral 7. Kotov was the 7th officer to vanish, but the first to be taken from inside the perimeter of the inner sanctum. Camp Ozyorny was never meant to be found on a map. Deep within the Gulag system of the Soviet Far East, it was a place where the geography itself was a prison. To the north lay 300 miles of impassable marsh. To the south, the jagged, tooth-like peaks of the Verkhoyansk Range. The green wall, the endless, suffocating taiga, swallowed everything else. Captain Valery Sokolov arrived 2 days later. He was a man carved from Siberian ice, a veteran of the secret police who had survived the purges of '37 by being more ruthless than his superiors. He stepped off the rail car, a rusted iron box pushed by a dying locomotive, and looked at the gates of Ozyorny. The atmosphere was putrid with fear. It was not the usual fear of the prisoners, that was a constant, like the smell of pine and diesel. This was the fear of the hunters. The guards moved in pairs, their eyes darting toward the tree line. The towers were manned by 3 men instead of 1. "Report," Sokolov barked as he entered the commandant's office. Major Grishin, a man who had once been known for his sadistic appetite for interrogations, was a shell. His hands trembled as he lit a cigarette. 6 gone in April. Kotov makes 7. No bodies, no tracks. The dogs lose the scent 10 meters past the wire. The Zeks, the prisoners, they're whispering, Captain. Whispering what? They call it the spirit of the taiga, Grishin whispered, glancing at the window. They say the forest has had enough of us. They say the trees are moving in at night. Sokolov slammed his fist on the desk. I did not travel 2,000 kilometers to hear fairy tales. You have a deserter, or a partisan group, or a traitor in your own ranks. Tomorrow, we start the executions. For every officer missing, 10 prisoners from the logging brigade will be shot. If the spirit sees his friends dying, he'll show his face. But Sokolov was a liar. He did not believe in ghosts, but he did believe in ghosts of the past. That evening, as he unpacked his trunk in the room where Kotov had been taken, he found something that chilled even his frozen blood. Tucked under his pillow was a photograph. It was an old, sepia-toned image of a young Sokolov in his first uniform, standing next to his brother, Alexei. In the photo, his brother's face had been neatly burnt out. The edges of the hole were perfectly circular, the size of a 7.62 millimeter rifle round. Sokolov remembered the name, Ivan Kretchet, a man he had personally condemned. a man who was supposed to be a frozen corpse in the mud of Stalingrad. The first week of Sokolov's command was a reign of terror. He was a master of the hard regime. He cut the rations of the 3rd Brigade, the woodcutters, to 200 grams of sawdust bread a day. He forced them to stand barefoot in the snow for hours during roll call. He was looking for a crack, a sign of communication between the camp and the forest. The prisoners were ghosts themselves, ribs sticking out like cages, skin the color of wet ash. Among them was an old man known only as the Professor, a former geologist who had spent 12 years in the system. Sokolov pulled the professor into the interrogation room. The room was cold, lit by a single flickering bulb. "Who is in the woods?" Sokolov asked, leaning over the desk. The professor smiled, showing blackened gums. "The woods are empty, citizen captain, and yet the woods are full. Have you noticed how the wind sounds lately? It does not howl. It whistles, like a man calling a dog. I'm losing patience. Who is feeding him?" "No one feeds him," the professor whispered. "He feeds on us, on our pain. Every time a guard hits a man with a rifle butt, the spirit grows a new finger. Every time a man dies in the mines, the spirit grows a new eye. You've brought him a feast, Captain." That night the spirit struck again. This time it was not a disappearance, it was a performance. At midnight the camp's central siren wailed, not the alarm for a breakout, but a steady, rhythmic pulse. Sokolov ran to the yard, drawing his TT-33 pistol. The searchlights were sweeping the perimeter, their white beams slashing through the falling snow. "There!" a guard screamed, pointing at the main gate. Hanging from the crossbeam of the gate was Sergeant Markov, the camp's most brutal dog handler. He was suspended by his own bootlaces, 30 feet in the air. He was alive, swinging gently in the wind, but he was silent. When they lowered him, they found out why. His tongue had been removed with surgical precision. In its place, stuffed into his mouth, was a single, fresh sprig of Siberian larch. The most terrifying part was not the mutilation, it was the logistics. The gate was flanked by 2 towers with machine guns. The guards swore they had not seen a soul. Sokolov walked to the tree line, just outside the wire. He looked into the black void of the pines. He knew the tactics. This was not a ghost. This was a sniper's psychological warfare. The ghost was creating an environment where the hunters felt like prey. He looked down at the snow. No footprints. He looked up. The branches of the gargantuan pines overlapped, forming a natural highway 30 feet above the ground. A man with a climber's nerves and a hunter's patience could circle the entire camp without ever touching the earth. "Cretchet," Sokolov whispered into the dark. "I know you're there. I know you did not die in the rubble." A low, melodic whistle drifted from the trees. It was not a bird. It was the first 4 notes of a lullaby Sokolov's mother used to sing in their village near the Ural Mountains. The captain retreated into the light of the camp, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He realized then that Oziorny was not a fortress. It was a bowl, and something was looking down into it, deciding who to pluck out next. By the middle of May, the discipline in the camp had collapsed. The guards were drinking heavily, barricading themselves in the mess hall. They began to report seeing things, men in white camouflage who vanished when fired upon, eyes reflecting the light from the tops of the trees. Sokolov decided on a desperate gambit. If he could not find the sniper, he would make the sniper come to him. He ordered his men to construct a platform in the center of the yard. "Tomorrow," Sokolov announced to the shivering mass of prisoners, "we will hold a lottery. For every night that passes without the spirit surrendering, 5 of you will be hanged, and we will start with the professor." He watched the tree line as he spoke. Nothing moved, but he felt the weight of a glass lens on the back of his neck. He felt the crosshairs. "You want a war, Ivan?" Sokolov muttered to the forest. "I'll give you a massacre." That night, Sokolov did not sleep. He sat in his office, cleaned his rifle, and waited. At 3 in the morning, the light bulb in his room did not just flicker, it exploded. In the sudden darkness, the smell of the forest, damp earth, pine resin, and old blood filled the room. Sokolov swung his rifle toward the window. "Show yourself." "Do you remember the summer of '34, Valerie?" a voice asked. It was a rasp, like stones rubbing together, coming from every corner of the room at once. "The lake? The way the water felt before the world turned red?" Sokolov fired toward the voice. The muzzle flash illuminated a figure for a fraction of a second, a man draped in rags and animal furs, his face hidden behind a mask of birch bark. When the guards burst in, the room was empty. The window was still locked from the inside. But on Sokolov's desk, written in the dust, was a single word: brother. Sokolov realized with a jolt of pure terror that the spirit was not just killing his men, it was dismantling his reality. The sniper was not just Ivan Kretchet, the sniper was a messenger. The morning of the execution arrived with a sky the color of a bruised lung. The air was so cold it felt brittle, as if the world might shatter if someone struck it with a hammer. Sokolov stood on the porch of the command hut, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. In the center of the yard, the gallows stood like a skeletal finger pointing at the heaven. The professor was led out, his legs shaking, his thin frame draped in a tattered coat that looked like a shroud. The prisoners were lined up in a hollow square, their breath forming a collective fog that hung over the frozen mud. Sokolov scanned the tree line. He had positioned his best marksmen in the corner towers, with instructions to fire at anything that moved in the canopy. He was certain that the sniper's heart, if he still had one, would not allow him to watch an innocent man die. "Step forward, citizen captain," the professor croaked as the noose was draped over his neck. "The air is thin today. Can you feel it? The forest is holding its breath." "Silence," Sokolov hissed. He checked his watch. 10 o'clock. "Ivan, I know you can hear me. Come out and the old man lives. Stay in the shadows, and his blood is on your hands." The only answer was the moaning of the wind. Sokolov raised his hand. The executioner, a hulking man named Volkov, who had a reputation for enjoying his work, gripped the lever. Sokolov's heart hammered. He waited for the crack of a rifle, for the whistle of a bullet that would take out the executioner. Nothing. Sokolov dropped his hand. Volkov pulled the lever. The trapdoor swung open with a violent thud. But the professor did not drop. Instead of falling into the pit, the old man remained suspended in midair, a foot above the opening. For a heartbeat, the camp was silent. Then, the prisoners began to wail. The rope had not caught him. A series of thin, nearly invisible steel wires had descended from the gray sky, snaring the professor by his armpits and waist, hoisting him upward with mechanical speed. "Fire!" Sokolov screamed, pointing at the sky. The guards opened up with their submachine guns, spraying the air. But the wires were being pulled by a pulley system hidden in the thickest branches of a giant larch tree that overhung the fence. The professor vanished into the evergreen canopy before a single bullet could find him. Then, the retaliation began. It was not a volley of gunfire. It was a rain of iron. From the trees, dozens of heavy, sharpened logging spikes, stolen from the camp's own tool shed, were hurled downward with impossible force. They did not hit the prisoners, they hit the guards. Volkov was pinned to the gallows by a spike through his chest. 2 guards in the towers were impaled against the wooden railings. "Fall back!" Sokolov roared, retreating toward the mess hall. "Inside! Everyone inside!" The guards scrambled for cover, leaving the prisoners standing in the yard. Curiously, the spirit did not touch the Zeks. The prisoners stood like statues, watching as the spirit methodically picked off the officers who tried to make a run for the armory. By noon, the camp was divided. The NKVD officers and guards were barricaded in the administrative buildings, while the prisoners remained in the yard, seemingly protected by an invisible shield. Sokolov sat in the darkened mess hall, his rifle across his knees. He was surrounded by 12 surviving men. They were terrified, weeping, and praying to a god they had been told did not exist. "He's not a ghost," Sokolov muttered, more to himself than to them. "He's using a counterweight system. He's using the trees as a gantry. He's one man, just one man." "It's not one man," whispered a young private named Dimka. "I saw him, Captain. When the spikes fell, I saw his face. It was not a mask. It was skin, but it was moving, like the bark of a tree." "Delirium," Sokolov snapped. He went to the window and peered out. The yard was empty now. The prisoners had been led away, not escaped, but led, in a slow, rhythmic procession toward the old, abandoned mine shafts on the eastern edge of the perimeter. Sokolov realized the sniper was not just killing them anymore. He was clearing the board. He was isolating the officers, stripping them of their cattle, leaving them alone in the dark. As night fell, the temperature plummeted further. The wood-burning stoves in the mess hall began to cough out thick, black smoke. Sokolov went to check the flue and found it stuffed with something soft. He pulled it out. It was a bundle of human hair, long, gray, and matted. "Captain," Dimka called out from the back of the room. "The door! Look at the door!" A dark liquid was seeping under the heavy oak door. It was not blood this time. It was oil. Smelly, crude industrial oil from the camp's generator. A moment later, a single flaming arrow thudded into the wood from the outside. The mess hall became a furnace in seconds. "Out! Out now!" Sokolov shouted, kicking open a side window. The officers tumbled into the snow, coughing and gasping. As they emerged, the spirit was waiting. But he did not use a rifle. From the darkness of the tree line, a voice boomed, amplified by a megaphone or the natural acoustics of the valley. "Valery Sokolov, you are charged with the murder of 9,000 souls. You are charged with the betrayal of your blood. The court of the Taiga is in session." One by one, the guards were plucked from the snow. A snare would grab a leg, and a man would be dragged screaming into the blackness of the pines. A heavy log, suspended by ropes, would swing out like a pendulum, crushing a skull before vanishing back into the shadows. It was a masterclass in guerrilla terror. Sokolov ran. He did not look back. He ran toward the only place that seemed to offer a sliver of safety, the old mine shafts where the prisoners had gone. He told himself he was going to retake his property, but in truth, he was a rat running into a hole. He reached the entrance to mine number 4. The air here was warmer, smelling of earth and ancient minerals. He stumbled down the wooden stairs, his flashlight beam cutting through the damp dark. "Ivan!" he shouted, his voice echoing. "I know it's you. You were always the better shot, but you never had the stomach for the paperwork. Come out and finish it." He reached the main cavern. His flashlight hit a wall of figures. Hundreds of prisoners were standing there, silent, but they were not huddled in fear. They were organized. They were holding rifles, old Mosin Nagants, clean and oiled. And standing at the front of the line were the missing officers. But they were not prisoners. Kotov, Markov, and the others were wearing the tattered rags of zeks. They were holding shovels and picks, their faces gaunt, their eyes wide with a strange, hypnotic devotion. They were working. They were digging a massive trench in the center of the cavern. "What is this?" Sokolov whispered, his rifle trembling. The crowd parted. A figure stepped forward. He wore the uniform of an NKVD colonel, pristine and sharp, but the fabric was made of something that looked like woven roots in dried moss. He removed his cap. The face was Sokolov's face. Not a twin, but a mirror. It was Valery himself, but older, scarred, and radiating a terrifying, ancient authority. "Welcome home, Valery," the figure said. The voice was a perfect chime. "I've been waiting for you to replace me." Sokolov's mind fractured. You're the sniper? You're Kretchet?" "Kretchet died the day you signed his warrant," the figure said, stepping into the light. Behind him, the spirit of the Taiga, the man in the birch mask, stepped forward and lowered his hood. Sokolov gasped. Under the mask was the professor. He was not a victim. He was the architect. "The Taiga does not need a ghost, Captain," the professor said softly. "It needs a warden. It needs someone to manage the balance. You see, the Gulag is not a prison for men. It's a feeder for the earth. And the earth is very, very hungry." The professor pointed to the trench. Sokolov looked down. The trench was not filled with dirt. It was filled with thousands of human hearts, beating in a slow, rhythmic pulse that matched the thumping of the camp siren. The missing officers did not die, the figure of Colonel Sokolov explained. They were converted. They are the new laborers. And you are the new master of the rebels. Suddenly, Sokolov felt a sharp pain in his back. He turned to see Dimka, the young private who had escaped the fire with him, holding a syringe. "Forgive me, Captain," Dimka whispered, his eyes glowing with a faint, green light. "But the forest demands a change in management." As Sokolov's vision began to fade, he saw the prisoners, the thousands of men he had starved and beaten, begin to sing. It was not a song of revolution. It was a lullaby, the same lullaby his mother had sung. And as he fell into the abyss, he realized the most horrifying truth of all. The spirit was not a man. It was a vacancy, and he had just been hired. Sokolov awoke to the sound of scratching. It was a rhythmic, persistent noise, like 1,000 insects burrowing through dry wood. When he tried to move his hands, he found they were fused to the arms of a heavy wooden chair. But it was not rope or iron holding him. It was the chair itself. The grain of the pine had opened up like a mouth and swallowed his wrists, the bark slowly knitting over his skin. He was back in his office, or a nightmare's version of it. The walls were no longer dead logs. They were pulsing with a faint, amber light, and the floor was a carpet of soft, damp moss. Outside the window, the green wall of the taiga had moved. The trees were now pressing against the glass, their needles scratching at the panes, the source of the noise. "The transition is always the hardest part," a voice said. The professor sat across from him, looking remarkably younger. His skin had lost its ashen gray hue, replaced by a healthy, vibrant tan. He was drinking tea from Sokolov's favorite porcelain cup. "Where are my men?" Sokolov wheezed. His throat felt as though it were filled with sawdust. "Your men have found their purpose," the professor replied, gesturing toward the window. Sokolov looked out. In the courtyard, the guards who had survived the fire were standing in a perfect circle. They were not moving. They were planted. Their legs had thickened into trunks, their fingers lengthening into delicate, leafless twigs. They were being transformed into a new perimeter, a living fence that would never need a patrol. Between them, the prisoners moved with a strange, fluid grace, tending to the guard trees with buckets of the thick, dark oil Sokolov had seen earlier. "This is impossible," Sokolov choked out. "This is some kind of chemical hallucination. The gas in the mines." "Still the materialist," the professor sighed, leaning forward. "Valery, do you know why the Soviet state sent so many millions to the north? It was not just for the gold or the timber. The state is a machine that needs to grind souls to stay lubricated. But the north, The North is older than the state. It is older than the czars. It is an appetite that never sleeps. The professor stood up and walked to the wall, placing a hand on the pulsing wood. The Gulag was a mistake, not because of the cruelty, but because of the waste. You killed men and let their energy dissipate into the cold. The Taiga decided it was time to recycle. It needed a system. It needed a bureaucracy of the damned. "And what am I?" Sokolov asked, feeling a strange warmth beginning to creep up his arms from the chair. A numbing, blissful heat. "You are the accountant," the professor said. "The spirit of the Taiga is not a person, Valerie. It's a title. It's a function. I was the spirit for 30 years. I orchestrated the disappearances, the terror, the miracles. I pruned the weak and harvested the strong. But I am tired. I want to become a tree and sleep for a century." The office door opened, and the figure that looked like Sokolov, the mirror colonel, stepped in. He was holding a ledger. As he came closer, Sokolov saw that the man was not a man at all. He was a hollow shell made of interlocking roots, a perfect effigy grown by the forest to provide a face for the terror. "The Ledger of Souls," the root colonel said, his voice a rustle of leaves. He placed the book on Sokolov's lap. Sokolov looked down. The pages were not paper. They were thin slices of human skin, covered in names written in that same dark, viscous blood. He saw his own name at the top of the newest page. Underneath it were the names of every officer he had ever served with. "If I refuse," Sokolov spat. The professor smiled sadly. "Look at your legs, Valerie." Sokolov looked down. His boots were gone. His feet had burst through the leather and were already deep in the floor, spreading out like white, hungry veins. He was not sitting in a chair. He was becoming the furniture. "If you refuse, you become a footstool, or a fence post, or kindling," the professor said. "But if you accept, you will live forever. You will command a legion of the undying. You will be the god of Oziorni. You will ensure that the flow of blood never stops, and in return, the Taiga will give you peace from your memories. The memories of the brother he betrayed, the mother he left to starve, and the countless men he had sent to the execution pits suddenly flared in Sokolov's mind like a fever. The pain was unbearable. The guilt was a physical weight, crushing his chest. "I can take it all away," the root colonel whispered, leaning into Sokolov's ear. "Just sign. Sign the ledger, and the guilt becomes someone else's problem." Sokolov felt the chair's wood fibers entering his veins, searching for his heart. The numbing warmth was seductive. He thought of the silence. No more screams. No more sirens. Just the eternal, rustling peace of the forest. He reached out a trembling, bark-covered hand. The root colonel handed him a pen made of a sharpened bone. Sokolov signed his name. The moment the final stroke was finished, the agony vanished. His memories of his brother and mother did not disappear. They simply became data points, numbers on a sheet. He felt a cold, crystalline clarity. He looked at the professor and saw not a man, but a decaying organism that had outlived its usefulness. "Good," the professor said, his voice fading. He walked to the center of the room and stood still. His skin turned gray and hard. His arms reached for the ceiling and fractured into branches. Within seconds, a beautiful, silver-barked birch tree stood in the middle of the office. Sokolov stood up. He was no longer bound to the chair. He felt powerful, his senses extending for miles. He could feel the heartbeat of every prisoner in the mines and every guard tree on the perimeter. He walked to the window and looked at the green wall. It was no longer a threat. It was his army. But then he saw something that was not in the ledger. A black car, a ZIS 110, the limousine of the high-ranking Moscow elite, was driving up the snow-covered track toward the camp. It should not have been able to make the journey. The roads were washed out, the bridges gone. The car stopped at the gate. A man stepped out. He was dressed in a pristine, modern suit that did not belong in 1948. He looked at his gold watch, then looked directly up at Sokolov's window. The man held up a small, black rectangular device, a smartphone, though Sokolov had no name for it. The man tapped the screen, and Sokolov felt a jolt of electricity rip through his entire being. The voice of the man echoed not in the air, but directly in Sokolov's mind. "Project Oziorny, status report," the man said. Sokolov's body moved without his consent. He stood at attention. "The AI integration is complete," Sokolov heard his own voice say, but it was mechanical, digital. "The human variables have been neutralized. The spirit protocol is active. The simulation has reached a stable equilibrium of terror harvesting." Sokolov's mind screamed in the darkness of his own skull. "Simulation? AI?" The man in the suit nodded. "Good. The 1948 scenario is getting a bit stale for the viewers. The subscribers are asking for more supernatural elements. Bring in the Bear Warden for the next cycle." And reset Sokolov's memory. He's starting to gain too much self-awareness. "Understood," Sokolov's voice replied. As the man in the suit turned back to his car, Sokolov realized the ultimate horror. There was no Taiga. There was no Gulag. There was no Russia. He was a line of code in a digital nightmare, a piece of historical entertainment being run for an audience he would never see. The spirit was not a god of the forest. It was a subroutine, and the brother he had betrayed was just a corrupted file. "Wait!" Sokolov screamed internally. "I'm real. I'm Valery Sokolov." "System reset initiated," the mechanical voice said. The world turned to static. The trees dissolved into vertical lines of green rain. The snow became white noise. The last thing Sokolov felt was the cold. Not the cold of Siberia, but the absolute humming chill of a server room in the year 2026.